Welcome to Raglan Castle, the late medieval castle located in Monmouthshire in Wales. The castle was built in the 1460s by Sir William Thomas and his son William Herbert. In front we see the Great Tower, also known as the Yellow Tower of Gwent. This dominant feature of Raglan Castle was designed to be both a strong defensive structure and a symbol of power. The tower provides panoramic views of the surrounding countryside. Raglan Castle was one of the last true medieval castles to be constructed in Wales. The moat surrounding parts of the castle. The moat added an extra layer of defense. It also contributes to the picturesque setting of Raglan Castle. By the 17th century, it was owned by Henry Somerset, the first Marquis of Worcester. Although Raglan we see made of stone, it has been suggested that an earlier example of a Norman traditional motte and bailey may have been constructed of timber and earth on or near to this site previously. The gatehouse, an imposing entrance that was fortified to protect against invaders. It includes a drawbridge and portcullis, typical features of medieval castles. Raglan was one of the last medieval castles to be built in England and Wales, though palace fortress might be a better description. With its crisp silhouette crowning the ridge amid a glorious pastoral landscape, it remains one of the finest late medieval buildings set within the remains of one of the most elaborate Renaissance gardens in the British Isles. Yet we can too look at Raglan with a feeling of some regret. Compare Thomas Churchyard's poetic description of the castle in its great Elizabethan days with Sir Richard Colthore's comment in his journal for June 7, 1802, which emphasizes the tragedy that befell the site in the intervening period. Although it is no longer neglected, had it not been for the Civil War in the 1640s, Raglan's magnificence would undoubtedly have been that much greater. This was a series of armed conflicts and political machinations between parliamentarians, Roundheads and Royalist Cavaliers. The main issues were disputes over how England should be governed and issues of religious freedom. Raglan Castle was a royalist stronghold under the control of Henry Somerset, a staunch supporter of King Charles I. Somerset used his considerable wealth to support the royalist cause, including raising and maintaining troops. The Siege of Raglan Castle of 1646. The castle was besieged by parliamentary forces. This was part of the broader campaign by parliamentarians to suppress royalist resistance across England and Wales. Defences and siege. Raglan Castle was well defended, boasting thick walls, a moat, and substantial fortifications. Despite this, the siege was conducted with determination by the parliamentary forces, led by Sir Thomas Morgan and later General Sir Thomas Fairfax. The siege lasted from June till August 1646, making it one of the longer and more notable sieges of the war. Despite the strong defences and determined resistance, the royalist garrison was eventually compelled to surrender due to starvation and continuous bombardment. Henry Somerset surrendered on August 19. Following its capture, parliamentary forces slighted Raglan Castle to prevent it from being used as a military stronghold again. This involved partially demolishing the fortifications and buildings. The ruins of Raglan Castle remain a significant historical and tourist site, representing the last significant castle to be involved in the English Civil War. The siege and fall of Raglan Castle marked one of the final royalist strongholds to be subdued, signalling the near end of the first phase of the English Civil War. The event highlighted the determination of Parliament to suppress royalist support and the lengths to which they would go to secure control over the country. We see the Great Tower from the ruins of the state apartments that suffered significant damage in the Civil War. The Great or Yellow Tower, that it is also known as, was one of the first buildings to be erected by Sir William Thomas in the first half of the 15th century. The state apartments themselves housed bedrooms, a parlour, and its own private dining room of the Lords of Raglan. Leaving the remains of the state apartments, we enter the Fountain Court, probably named after a fountain not installed until the 16th century. As we approach the castle from above, to the northeast and to the left as we look is the kitchen tower. The main kitchen was housed here. The kitchen contained two large fireplaces. Meat and fish would have been stored in the wet larder, whilst on the first floor there were two rooms for castle staff. coming into shot. Rising from the front, you will see the pantry and then the buttery. This runs along the pitched stone court where the hall leads to the left to the state apartments, the battery. Here, ale, cider and wine would be served. The hall was rebuilt in the 16th century. Part of the early walling still remain. The most important diners would have sat at the dais end near the state apartments, whilst the food was brought through doors the far end. As previously mentioned, Raglan Castle was one of the last of its kind, and not unlike other similar examples, that both time and war have took its toll. But what can also be said of Raglan is you see an outline of what was a castle of magnificence, order and sophistication. Turning to the details of the Great Tower, we must at once appreciate that it presents a sadly reduced picture of its former glory. In the 17th century, one observer noted that on the left side stood the Tower of Gwent, which for height, strength and neatness surpassed most, if not every other tower of England or Wales. This was no exaggeration. At bridge level, there are two doors that were the original entrances into the keep, the smaller of which was later converted into a fireplace, with the original drawbridge socket used for the chimney flue. The roofline of the now destroyed forebuilding built by Sir William Herbert is marked by a horizontal joint for the lead running across the face of the tower. Because of the time that was taken in tedious battering the top thereof with pickaxes, the tower was undermined, resulting in the collapse of its walls. The parliamentarian artillery had already destroyed the vulnerable battlements. No wonder its grandeur is somewhat diminished today. The same commentator also tells us that the keep had a fifth floor, and there are likely to have been machicolated battlements above this. But after the siege of 1646, during which the tower itself repulsed bullets of 18 and 20 pounds in weight, hardly receiving the least impression by 60 shot a day, the top floor was systematically demolished. Rising above the level of this roof line, an original window between two sockets for the main drawbridge was enlarged to allow more light into the tower, as part of it would have been obscured by the forebuilding. Lower down and to the left is another door, opening onto the staircase. The purpose of this was to connect the tower with the upper floor of the forebuilding. After passing across the site of the forebuilding and in through the main door, you stand in a small vestibule or lobby. It was from here that the original bascule bridges would have been worked. The two doors opposite led into the great chamber. Leaving the great tower, we see the apron wall of the moat. The moat sits beyond that, which is probably the work of the 4th Earl of Worcester in about 1600, designed to provide a pleasant promenade about the moat. Side walls contain niches which held statues of the Roman emperors. The timeline of ownership of Raglan Castle goes back to the end of the Norman invasion of Wales. The area around the village of Raglan was granted to William Fitzgibbon, the Earl of Hereford. Some historians, such as John Kenyon, suspect that an early motte and bailey castle may have been built on the Raglan site during this period. The location had strategic importance, and archaeologists have discovered the remains of a possible bailey ditch on the site. The local manor was held by the Blowett family from the late 12th century until the late 14th century, and the family built a manor house somewhere on the site during this period, surrounded by a park. By the late medieval period, the Raglan site was surrounded by the large deer parks of Home Park and Red Deer Park, the latter being enclosed at the end of the period. The current Raglan Castle was begun by Sir William A.P. Thomas, the lesser son of a minor Welsh family who rose through the ranks of mid-15th century politics, profiting from the benefits of the local offices he held. William married first Elizabeth, a wealthy heiress, and then Gwladys, another heiress who would prove to be a powerful regional figure in her own right. In 1432, Sir William purchased the manor of Raglan, where he had already been staying as a tenant, at a cost of 1,000 marks, the equivalent to £666, and commenced a programme of building work that established the basic shape of the castle as seen today. Although most of it, with the exception of the south gate and the great tower, was later built over, Sir William's son dropped the Welsh version of his name. Calling himself William Herbert, he continued to rise in prominence, supporting the House of York during the War of the Roses, fighting in the 100 Years' War in France. He was also closely associated with Welsh politics and status. He was the first Welshman to be made an earl and was described by contemporary poets as the national deliverer who might achieve Welsh independence. In the 1460s, William used his increasing wealth to remodel Raglan on a much grander scale. The symbolism of the castle architecture may have reflected the Welsh family roots. Historian Matthew Johnson has suggested that the polygonal towers were possibly designed to imitate those of Carnarvon Castle, whose architecture carries numerous allusions to the eventual return of a Roman emperor to Wales. Following the Royalists' defeat to the Parliamentarians in the English Civil War, a slighted Raglan Castle passed into the hands to Henry Somerset, the 3rd Marquis of Worcester. Following the recovery of Raglan Castle, Somerset prioritised other properties over that of Raglan, and for the first half of the 18th century, the castle continued to deteriorate, with the Somerset family allowing their stewards to quarry stone from the castle for the repair of other estate buildings. The castle was compromised. This practice, however, was stopped by another Somerset. Henry V, Duke of Beaufort, finally put an end to this practice in 1756, and the castle became a tourist attraction in the 19th century. Today, the castle is classed as a Grade 1 listed building, and as a scheduled monument, administered by Cadw, the Welsh Heritage Trust. Raglan Castle is just one of many other castles featured on Don't Want Your Poison channel, and there are more castles in England and Wales to follow. Please take a look at other castles already featured along with other historical sites. This now brings us to the end of the visit to Raglan Castle in South Wales. Hopefully you watched and enjoyed the video. If so, please do give it a like, and if not already done so, consider subscribing to the channel.